I'm so excited that you took the time to join us on the next episode of Beyond the Culture. This is the show where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David M. Walker. Hey, welcome everyone to the next episode of Beyond the Culture. And I have a fantastic conversation waiting for you today. But before we get into that conversation, as you know, every week I ask you to do me a favor. I ask you to hit that subscribe button. Hit the subscribe button, and that way every week when a new episode goes live, you'll be notified that Beyond the Culture is ready for you to listen to. So hit that subscribe button and subscribe to the show. And of course, now you know we have our newsletter. If you just go to beyondtheculturepodcast.com and sign up, and every week you'll get our newsletter. And not only that, but you will get the latest episode of Beyond the Culture right into your inbox. And of course, the final thing that I always ask is that you share the show. Hit the share button and let someone else know that Beyond the Culture is on. I often say, if you like the show, I'm sure they're going to like it too. So now, let's get ready to go into this wonderful conversation. Today, I have on the show Mr. Darryl Jacobs. Now, Darryl is an ESPN Networks college basketball analyst. He is also the executive director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Alliance at Rising Coaches. Finally, Darryl is a former head basketball coach, where he's made stops at Queens College, Virginia State University, Clark Atlanta, Felician, and Lehman College. And I'm super excited to have on Beyond the Culture today my guest, Mr. Darryl Jacobs. Darryl, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Walker. It's a privilege, and I look forward to having this conversation with you.
Man, I am just super excited to have you on the show. And as my audience know, on a weekly basis, I talk to athletic directors and coaches and athletes. And today is going to be my first time talking with a sports analyst, someone who watches the game, analyzes the game, talks about the game, so that way the fans could have a better time enjoying what they're seeing out there, on the court. So I'm super excited, and I can't wait to have this conversation with you. But before we get into some of the depths of actually what you do, take us back. Give us your background. Where you from, and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey, better known for Paterson Eastside High School, of course, with the movie Lean on Me.
Lean on Me.
Paterson Eastside High School. I actually coached there. I actually got my career in coaching started there after I played a little bit of pro basketball overseas. And, subsequently from there, went to the college level. And from there, being assistant college coach, ultimately became a head coach and spent over 20 years as a head coach at the collegiate level. And at all three levels, Division I, 2 and 3, and then ultimately leaving college coaching, transitioning into some of the things I'm doing now, and fortunate enough to be at ESPN as a network analyst for all the different ESPN subsidiaries that they have.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. So you've coached, but how did you get into coaching? What was the inspiration for you to get involved with coaching?
Well, I grew up in a sports-related family, and also, Paterson, New Jersey was a sport town. Growing up playing 3 sports and running track as well. I actually went to high school in North Carolina, believe it or not, and played high school basketball, baseball, and other sports as well. And then, ultimately, going to the college level and playing. I'm one of the few guys, they don't make them like me, as I say anymore. I played 2 sports in college.
Okay.
I was starting running back on the football team, starting point guard on the basketball team at an NAIA Division I school, and then played a little professional basketball overseas as well. Then ultimately, to stay affiliated with the game, I got into coaching. And most of the time, wherever I played at, whether it was high school or college, my coaches always say I was a coach on the floor. So the natural progression was to be a coach.
You said that you coached at, I think, all 3 levels, Division II, Division III, Division I. So talk about the journey. I mean, was it rewarding for you? Was it, because I know you're not doing it now, but I just want to know about that journey. How rewarding was it for you actually, being on the sideline and coaching the game?
Oh, I love basketball. I love all sports, but you got to have a passion for it. I remember when I left Patterson Eastside High School as assistant coach, I got my first college job. I didn't even care how much money it was. I just wanted to coach.
I hear you.
And I didn't even know when we was getting paid. Checks would be in my mailbox back then. They didn't have the direct deposit. You had to get your check in your mailbox at the school mailbox, and it would be checks piling up in there. And the head coach would be like, "You're not checking your checks." And I was like, "Listen, I don't care about the money. I just want the coach." But ultimately, I knew, because I have a passion for it and I really want to learn my craft, the money will come down the road. And ultimately, it did when I became a head coach.
So you've had several stops, which we mentioned. I want to know about the challenges of going through the coaching ranks. Especially being an African-American male, I'm sure there were challenges there. And I know they're just in general challenges coming up.
No question about it.
Yeah. So talk about the challenges and the struggles with going through the coaching ranks.
Well, no question about it. Henceforth, you mentioned what I do now as being executive director of Rising Coaches Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Alliance. We're the largest coach association in the country. We have coaches from the NBA, WNBA, college, high school, and grassroots. And part of what I do there is create opportunities and provide access to minority coaches and women coaches as well, with decision makers. But ultimately, when I was coming along, I was the first African-American head coach at two schools, two PWIs, we call them predominantly white institutions.
Sure.
As well. And ultimately, was able to lay the foundation for them to hire other coaches, because quite naturally, being successful and able to move on, it kind of leaves them in a position to say, hey, he was an African-American head coach. And sometimes you're stigmatized.
Right.
Most of the time when you're coaching, particularly now, you're known as a recruiter. You're not known as a tactician. So one of the things I wanted to do was really master my craft. And I had a great mentor, two particular coaches, Henry Baker Senior, who was my junior college coach, and Tom Barise. They're both deceased now, who gave me my first college job, who was an NBA scout at the time, with the Cavaliers. And they gave me the foundation in terms of my coaching acumen and the X and O part as well. Both of them had strong parts of what they did as a coach, and I took from each and every one of them. Coach Barise, Tom Barise was a tactician, and Coach Baker was the motivator. So very challenging. Of course, when I first got in, ultimately, when you get in and you start recruiting, you start winning. Unfortunately, some of my white counterparts start to say, you're doing things illegal, and you was doing things the right way, and you start to get questioned about that, because now you're making a difference. You're getting players that they normally were getting. And now here I was able to get the players that they normally get. Now I was getting them and being successful in my program. And unfortunately, dirty politics start to play the part of it as well. A lot of things you had to endure as a coach. Ultimately back then also, Dr. Walker, the BCA was the Black Coach Association. I joined them. And of course, back then you had John Thompson, George Raveling, Nolan Richardson, guys who were really trendsetters, John Chaney, guys who were really heading the BCA, who I became friends with. And they took an active interest in me as a coach. And ultimately, I was able to lean on them and really watch some of the things they did. Ultimately, why I'm doing what I'm doing now, to be an advocate for creating opportunities for minority coaches.
I love the names that you mentioned. You just mentioned some of the most legendary, not just African-American coaches, but coaches.
Absolutely.
John Thompson, George Raveling, John Chaney. I refereed many games with the old owl, as we called him down there in Temple. And it's just so wonderful to know that you were connected with those legendary people, because I'm sure you learned a lot, and they helped you tremendously in both areas. Obviously coaching, because you need great mentors. But then again, as you say, as an African-American coming through the ranks, you kind of need that to help to support you as you go through.
Well, no question. When I was coming along as a kid, watching sports on TV, the first Black coach I really saw, of course, Bill Russell, in the late 60s, early 70s, was a player coach and ultimately became a regular coach at NBA. But Al Attles,
Oh
who's from
yeah,
New
yeah.
Jersey,
Golden State. Yeah.
Golden State Warriors. I remember watching them in the championship. And, me being a young Black boy at the time, you didn't see a lot of, even in baseball, I didn't see a lot of Black managers. Even my profession now as analysts, you didn't see a lot of Black analysts or commentators.
Right.
So anytime you saw someone, you automatically gravitated towards them. Initially, with Coach John Thompson, who I became very good friends with, as well as John Chaney and Nolan Richardson and a lot of other guys, Perry Clark. There were so many guys out there, African-American head coaches who I can lean on, who gave me the foundation for somebody that I can look to and say, hey, I could become a head coach at the college level, regardless of my ethnicity.
At some point in your coaching career, you make a shift to being an analyst. and obviously, as we introduced,
well, coaches, we always was analysts.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But you've now come off the sidelines, and as I said, you are a Division I college basketball analyst and commentator for ESPN Networks. Why the change? Why did you get into being on the sidelines in that capacity?
Well, it was something I didn't plan. I'll tell people the story all the time. It's amazing how I got into it. Ultimately, I left coaching to take care of my dad,
okay,
who was suffering from Alzheimer's. And I had just got burnt out from coaching altogether. But I had a friend who had a professional ABA team who asked me to coach that year. And I said, well, I ain't got to be in the gym 5 days a week. I practice 2 days a week, show up on Saturday. That's good for me. Give me time to take care of my dad and start my transition into something else. Ultimately, we had a good year. We ended up going to the Elite Eight in the ABA. And of course, the ABA is the same ABA that the Dr. J's and George Gervin, those guys played in. But this was on a lower level, as well. And ultimately, we went to the Elite Eight. We lost the first round game, Dave. Okay. And they asked me to come in and do a post-game interview, and I did. And then about 15 minutes later, they said, hey, you so well-spoken. The analyst that was supposed to do the game, he's not feeling well. So, Darryl, would you mind sitting in? I said, no problem. I sit in, and they said, do you need time to prep? I said, oh, no, I need no time to prep. Now, it was being carried by Sports Radio America and ESPN3, the championships. I did the first game. They said I did so well, they asked me to stay for the next game. And I did the next game and go back to my hotel that night thinking everything, is done. We can get ready to go home or whatever the case may be. I get a call from the producer from Sports Radio America, who said the ESPN people thought I was so fantastic, they would like for me to do the rest of the championships. And he said, I also told them, they said he was so well prepared. And he told them he didn't have one note in front of him.
Wow.
Didn't have a note in front of him. And they was like, you're kidding me. So ultimately, after those ABA championships, they got in touch with me and said, hey, would you like to do Division I basketball games for ESPN Networks? I said, sure. And I continued to work with Sports Radio America back then, as well as some other conferences like NEC, Northeast Conference Networks, and then ultimately just strictly with ESPN Networks now. So no broadcasting background. Only thing I did was imitate watching the Knicks growing up with Marv Albert and those guys. My friends would love for me to do that. Not knowing, Dave, I was preparing myself for what I'm doing now.
Right.
And of course, being an analyst, being a college coach, you're always an analyst. We're always looking at stats, breaking down. I would often tell a lot of NBA guys I've worked out, I said, well, you play a 48-minute game. Give you this example. This is how I was doing analytics way back then. I said, man, on a 48-minute game, you play 30 minutes a night. I said, let's break that off into 6 5-minute intervals. I said, man, if you get 4 points every 5 minutes, right? And I said, you get 2 rebounds. I said, give me your stat line for the game. And he was thinking, I said, okay, you got 24 points and you got 12 rebounds.
Wow.
That's NBA All-Star status.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of money. And the young man who we were named nameless, looked at me and said, I never thought about it like that.
Wow.
I said, yes. So I said, what you do most of the time when I watch you in a 30-minute session of your games, out of the 30 minutes, I said, man, you are inactive maybe about 20 minutes. That means 10 minutes where you're really producing and you're making an impact on the game. But I said, there's about 20 minutes where I see you not really doing nothing. You're just coasting. And subsequently, that player really got it. And ultimately, the last couple of years of an NBA career, he became real productive as well. So, that was before analytics was fashionable as well. Of course, now analytics is taking over as well. And strictly analytics is math. And not too many African Americans is taking part in learning the analytics, whether it's sports analytics or business analytics as well.
For those of you who are just tuning in, you're listening to Beyond the Culture, and my guest today is Darryl Jacobs. He is the ESPN Networks college basketball analyst. And so Darryl, you're talking about, how you made the transition from coaching, and now you're on the sideline as an ESPN analyst. And so do you see the game differently from that seat versus the seat that's to the left?
Of course not. You always see it from a head coach's point of view because that's what I was. But also, people often think I just show up to games and just start broadcasting. But, the prep is just like I'm coaching. I watch film. I do scouting reports. I have to take notes. There's a lot of work that's involved. And then you have to get with your play-by-play person to make sure you're on the same page. You got to make sure, what they're talking about. You got to make sure if we're going to commercial, what we're coming back to. ESPN is fortunate enough to give me a segment during my games called the Darryl Dimes, where I give 3 points of emphasis that both teams need to potentially focus on for that particular game, just to give the viewers some type of breakdown. And I love it when I'm on point, which is probably 90% of the time, doing games. And they say, hey, let's revisit those Darryl Dimes, or, during the commercial breaks, I may tell the producer, listen, right now, when I talked about, those bench points, it's 17-0. Let's go back after the timeout and talk about those. Let's talk about the rebound and disparity. Let's talk about points off turnovers. Let's talk about pot. And pot means, those points off turnovers. I always give a good analysis or, come up with some catchy phrase when I'm talking about these things as well. Even when it's a radio broadcast, we talked about this before we got on the air. There's 2 ways you have to broadcast. If you're doing radio, you have to paint that picture. Because the people can't see the game. If you're doing television, you really can be an analyst and you really give your expertise in regards to what the game situation is, what teams may look for, et cetera, just to give the viewers some insight. And you try to predict things ahead of time for the viewers to be like, oh, yeah, he's right. For example, if they go to a timeout, I might say, on the defense side of the basketball, they got to look to do this. But if they change defense, they may have to do this. They may have to stop this person. On the offense side of the ball, they may have to call 2 plays, 1 for a zone, 1 for a man. You got to be prepared. Or they may come back out and call a timeout just to see what the defense set is. So those are the kind of things that an analyst does as well. It's a lot of work. But it's fun.
Yeah. And, I love the fact that you said, unfortunately, some people just think you just show up and then you go to work. But you talk about being prepared and all the things that you have to do and being prepared to call that game. And that's vitally important. And it's great to know that you do that. Here's a question for you. How do you get assigned? Do you pick where you go? Do they tell you where you go? What kind of games, locations that
in the beginning, you didn't pick, you just a new jack on the block.
Exactly.
So, you just go anywhere they tell you. But, ultimately, when you become a senior analyst, you get to choose your region where you want to work. Once COVID hit, I pretty much say, listen, I'm not trying to travel,
sure,
no more than 2 hours. So if you can keep me in New Jersey, that's great. And I had the seniority to be able to stay in New Jersey, whether I was doing, a Seton Hall game, St. Peter's game, Fairleigh Dickinson game. I was very fortunate the past 2 years to be able to stay in the state of New Jersey. But, ultimately, it's going to begin to open back up a little bit. So I'm going to be able to start to stretch out a little bit and feel comfortable going different places, whether it's, I'm covering the Colonial Athletic Conference and other conferences in the South as well, which I'm looking forward to.
How do you see the game now? I know it's changed, but what is your perspective on the game? At least going back to while you were coaching and then watching it now. Has it changed a lot? Or is it just still the game that you know?
Well, the game has changed dramatically. Even when I was coaching, there was a shift. And if you're not prepared for it as a coach, you can get lost out in regards to being able to adapt to the style of play and what the players are accustomed to. Everything has become less post play, as you know, and more perimeter play. The 3-point shot has really taken over and has become something very valuable that coaches look to recruit. And some coaches cater their offense towards taking the three. Some coaches believe in volume. The more threes we get up, the better our chances are to win. And then you have some coaches that understands about changing their style of play depending on the opponent. And those are the teams that can really do some damage. If you watch St. Peter's, I was the main broadcaster of St. Peter's this year.
Wow.
If you watch them, and I kind of predicted that they would be a problem for teams because you're not used to seeing this kind of defensive pressure. The defense was old school, was throwback, in your face, relentless. And he had kids, like he said, from New York and New Jersey who just stayed after it, just would not let you outwork them. And a lot of times, if you're not prepared for that type, you see them on film and then you get in front of them, you're like, wow, these guys are really playing hard. They have no fear. They on the big stage. They understand. They've got their coach's mentality and they have a game plan, as well. So when you got a combination of that, along with some great coaching, which Coach Shaheen Holloway did a fantastic job of showing that he's among the elite coaches in the country at a young age, it's a recipe for success.
I love hearing about that old school defense that you mentioned, because I know the game has played, like you say, no more post play as much.
But Dave, you see it in the NBA playoffs right now.
Absolutely.
Because you are a former official, so know when it comes postseason play, the physicality is different. The officials will let you play. Even when I was a college coach, we got into the conference tournament. I said, guys, it's a different ball game. And then when you got a veteran team, they understood that. They understood that they can be a little bit more aggressive. And the officials are not dictate the game. If both teams come out aggressive, they're going to let you play. And sometimes when teams are not aggressive, then they become aggressive. They get hit with fouls. But the NBA Finals is basically going back to the 80s and 90s in terms of how they allow them to play, particularly the Eastern Conference Finals, particularly with Milwaukee and Boston. And Boston and Miami is playing that style of play as well. So, but yes, it's the old school defense. St. Peter's is a perfect example this year NCAA tournament, what that looks like and how effective that can be.
Yeah, St. Peter's went on a great ride this year, and that's what the greatest thing about that NCAA tournament, seeing giant slayers.
The best sporting event in American sports is the NCAA tournament.
Is the NCAA tournament.
It's the best month and the best sporting event in American sports.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. What do you think about the NIL? Is that doing damage to the game with the kids? I know, for years, kids were not receiving anything for their name,
not legally. Not legally.
Right, not legally, right. But it's big and it stays in the news. I mean, I'm hearing players getting $1 million contracts now. And freshmen, sophomores, what do you think about what's going on with the NIL?
The biggest problem with the NIL, Dave, is the fact that there's no regulations for it. When it first came out, the NCAA, really dropped their ball on putting some restrictions in place and some parameters in which you can do it. And then the university and the colleges themselves, they wasn't prepared for it neither. They had to get their arm wrapped around it, how it was going to be in compliance for what they want to do and everything. Recently, the NCAA just came out, released something that they're putting some measures in place, but it's just to deal with the collective. And if the viewers or listeners don't know what the collective is, that's boosters.
Right.
They're trying to regulate the boosters. Well, you didn't foresee this coming. Me, a former coach, and understand how things are in collegiate athletics, immediately I thought like the boosters is going to have field day, helping their respective institutions attract players as well as pay players in a way that now, before they couldn't do, now they can do that as well. And ultimately, what you're seeing, even with the transfer portal, and we'll talk about that as well, the two main things that's impacting collegiate athletics particularly is the transfer portal and the NIL. But particularly in the transfer portal now, a lot of kids are going to different schools because now the NIL portion of that school, wherever they go to, can monetize their brand. Give you a perfect example. Mike Davis, former Indiana University head coach, who's at Detroit Mercy now. His son was one of the top scorers in the country over the past 3 years, and he put himself in the transfer portal.
I heard about that.
Ultimately, he came back because
right.
he got a deal with, I believe, a Japanese company for something called Global.
Okay.
A six-figure deal. And of course, Detroit Mercy does not have any football program. So he's going to spread his NIL deal out among all the student athletes within the Detroit Mercy athletic department, which is huge. And as I told one of my friends who coaches, I said, he's lucky they don't have football because there's no way he could have done that, as well. But he decided to return back, as well. You just saw yesterday, the other day with Coach Saban from Alabama mentioned about Texas A&M as well as Jackson State, potentially paying players. And of course, there's going to be a lot of controversies around that. But that's ultimately, now you're beginning to see the impact that some of these schools are getting through that gray area where there's no restriction, and they're really capitalizing on that. And now you're stepping on the toes of the Alabamas and all them that. And how do they respond? With comments just like Nick Saban put out there the other day, not just about Jackson State, but Texas A&M as well.
Yeah, I was just before we got on the interview today, I was watching the TV, and they were talking about Saban and he going after Deion because the kid Deion got.
And they do commercials together for athletics.
That's what I said. So
all gloves off now, because
exactly.
Now you tapping into players, 5-star guys that normally would come to me. Now you're going over here. Wait a minute. Now you taking food out of my mouth. Nick Saban. So
all bets are off now, and
absolutely. So now you're beginning to see what it can lead to, and I'm not surprised this is happening. Ultimately, it was going to happen. Involving Deion Sanders, because now, as he said, his quote was, we don't need to pay our people to come play with our people, and that was his response. But what Coach Saban has to understand, football is different from basketball. You can go to the NFL from an HBCU, and you have somebody there that a lot of the scouts respect. Unfortunately, a few HBCU players got drafted in the NFL, but a ton of them got signed as free agents. A ton of them got signed, and a lot of times that's what they do to get them on the cheap. Instead of draft, to say, you know what, nobody's going to find this kid. Nobody's going to draft him, so we don't need to draft him, but we're going to go ahead and sign him as well. And hopefully that trend changes somewhere down the road.
Yeah, hopefully, because that's vitally, vitally important. For those of you who are just joining us today, my guest today is Darryl Jacobs, and he's joined Beyond the Culture, and we're having an outstanding conversation. Darryl, I want to shift a little bit and talk about the rising coaches. You are the executive director for diversity, equity, and inclusion for Rising Coaches. Before you get into what you do specifically, just tell us about the Rising Coaches organization. What that's all about, and what do they do?
As I mentioned, previously, Rising Coaches is the largest coach association in America. Coaches ranging from the NBA, WNBA, college, high school, and grassroots basketball. It came about maybe about 12 years ago. The CEO, Adam Gordon, a fantastic man, and his heart is in the right place. Him and some friends got together and decided to say, let's start a coaching association where we can get together at Final Fours, come together, share some ideals. And that's what happened. And ultimately, it's grown, over the years. I came aboard 2 years ago after actually interviewing Adam Gordon, the CEO, and he called me right afterwards and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a DEI alliance as well. It was in the wake of the George Floyd and all that kind of stuff as well. And he said, I'm thinking about starting it. And I said, well, that's great. He said, I would like for you to be the executive director. I said, well, you got to be very sincere in what you're saying. We just can't have it as a title and not do anything. I need for you to be out in front.
Right.
And he assured me he would be. And ultimately, here we are 2.5 years later, where we have made some major impact with the DEI Alliance. We work with like 12 or 13 different minority coaches association, whether it's Jewish, Asian, women, LGBTQ. We work with the different organizations on their initiative, as well as providing them an opportunity to have access to decision makers in the collegiate athletic space, and also provide them with the opportunity to get the necessary training as far as interviewing, because a lot of times minority candidates don't have the secret code. On paper, they'll look great, but when they go into the interview process, their white counterparts sometimes already know exactly what to expect and how to go about interviewing where the minority candidate may not be as well. So I was able to, along with Kim Hampton, former WNBA legend, who's my vice president of women's basketball, as well as Brian Burton, who's my vice president of men's basketball, was able to put together some initiative, particularly one called the Next Up Initiative and the Women Empowerment series that we have out. But the Next Up Initiative has been a huge success for us because we work with the different coaches associations who give us candidates who they think is next in line to become the Division I head men, women coaches. And what we do particularly is have search firms who are part of my board of advisors who actually come in with the Next Up Initiative and prepare them, take them through the interview process, as well as give them access to these decision makers. So when those search firms have jobs that come open, Dave, they can say, you know what? Wow, the Next Up Initiative, David Walker, man, he was fantastic. He might be a great candidate, over here at, the University of Kansas. Okay. The search firm now train them, say, man, they were fantastic. And now they create opportunities. And, over the last 2 years that we had had 4 coaches become Division I head coaches and 1 coach become an NBA G League head coach. So we're very proud of how the needle is moving, as well. And then just this past basketball season, we had something called equality inclusion in college basketball for the month of February. Went from February 10th through the 24th. And we had over 250 Division I schools participate in the initiative, where they did an equality and inclusion day, game, or night, recognizing what this means and how important it is to shed some light on this whole thing of equality and inclusion, not just in basketball, but also in other areas in my society.
Yeah, I saw a piece on that. I think all the coaches had to wear black or something.
Yes, yes. Right? We actually sent every Division I school pins, an equal pin that they wear to both the men and women programs, and we asked them to wear black during those games. And you can see it as well if you go on the Rising Coaching site, www.risingcoaches.com. You can see that as well. If you go to my YouTube channel, Darryl Jacobs, ESPN College Basketball, you'll see I have something up there where I spoke halftime of the George Mason Fordham game, talking about the Rising Coaches and with equality inclusion, why we did the initiative in college basketball.
Did they have to do anything else special that night other than wear the black and the pin? Anything particular?
No, it all depends what the student athletes want to do. From that point on, we let them create their own initiative if they want to recognize someone. Some people recognize people for their contribution to equality and inclusion, whether it was a professor on campus or just bringing somebody in. We allowed them to do whatever they saw fit. But our main goal was to put it out there in the forefront, keep the conversation going, because a lot of times things lose momentum. And it was such a success, Dave, that we're going to be doing it every year.
Wow.
And a lot of the schools are going to be looking out for it. Now we done had high schools reach out to us who want to do it, Division II schools, Division III. So now we're going to have it all around the country, which we're very, very proud of.
Oh man, that's awesome because it's needed. Everybody's included. Everybody get involved. The day of not you, that's.
And sports is the platform in which people of all ethnic groups, races, sides, creeds, colors come together for one common goal, and that's to win. And you see it when they're competing, they're hugging, they're laughing, they're doing whatever they're going to do. Sports is the unifier in our society, and we should use it as such. So that's why we're using platforms like the college basketball coaches and institutions to continue to shed some light on those situations. And, hopefully we can spread it into the professional sports. We're talking to the National Basketball Association. I talk with them. I talk to the NFL. So hopefully we can do something like that on the professional level as well and continue to move the needle forward with the conversation.
As we get ready to bring this conversation, and it's a wonderful conversation that I'm having with Darryl Jacobs, going back to the analyst position, what advice would you give someone who wanted to pursue that as a career, to actually sit on the sideline and be an analyst for college, pro, or whatever they want to do, what would you advise them to do?
Well, definitely, get educated, understand what you have to do. You have to have great public speaking skills, writing skills. That's so important to have. Being able to articulate yourself on camera. Mistakes will happen. Preparation, is the key. Is when I got into the space, like I said, I just fell into the space, but there's not a lot of minorities, particularly Black males. And if you see analysts, they are former players. Nobody else outside of them being a former player normally don't have this kind of opportunity. We're not even talking about the play-by-play person, which is far between as well for African Americans. So, what I'm trying to do now is galvanize a lot of African American broadcasters around the country, which I have, who are fantastic, who are great. Even the ones you see on TV, we're going to get together. And now, companies like Learfield is one of those multimedia companies you see on college campuses that do a lot of sponsorships, but they're also in charge of recruiting talent to do radio broadcasts or TV broadcasts for these universities. And they're making a concerted effort now as well to find minority talent to put in those positions. And as I told them, there's a lot of people out there that's doing it. If you go to some of these HBCUs, but a lot of people now are getting away from it a little bit because they want to be, athletes. It's sort of like baseball. Baseball among African American males is far in between now. When I was coming up, that's all we did as well. And if you consider the Latino players, they consider them Black players as well, which they are as well. But Black American players in baseball is far in between now. It's the same way in broadcasting as well. But there's a lot of opportunities going forward. The door is wide open right now. Make sure your public speaking skills are there. Your writing skills got to be there. Your research skill has to be there. And myself, being an African American, I know whatever I do on camera, on screen, is going to set the trend and open doors for other people. So that's why I'm so emphatic about being prepared for my broadcast all the time. I'm representing the population. And, and it's on my shoulders. I have no problem with taking that responsibility on whatsoever. As Cindy Portier say, told Denzel Washington them responsibility. So I'm definitely having that on my shoulder is an honor, and I welcome it.
Darryl, you have, you really enlighten us as to what you actually do in your profession and being on TV and sometimes radio, and how you have to be as a sports analyst. It's not a job you just show up for. You have to be prepared. You have to train and, develop your skills. So, because when you get out there, the lights are on and you're not going to get 2 or 3 chances. If you get 2, you're lucky.
Well, you just got to, but here's the great thing about if you mess up, nobody don't know what you're talking. They don't know anything. True. So, as I would tell some people, don't worry about it. They don't know if it's the wrong stat. A lot of people don't do research.
That's true.
Then you have some of those, it's like when you watch, of course, the guys in studio at ESPN, Stephen A. Smith, all of them, they got to know their research. They got people that's doing the research. They got to make sure they are on point with a lot of stuff because, in that particular area, people are going to question you if you're giving stats and you're not providing the data, for it to show up. And that don't mean you're right.
Right.
I can give you stats of what I believe in and my data to back it up. And I've proven my point. You may not agree with it, but that's how I feel. But I back my argument up. As somebody once said, don't raise your voice, raise your argument.
I like that. You mentioned it already, but give us your how our listeners can connect with you.
Oh, you can find me on Facebook, Darryl Jacobs, ESPN College Basketball Analyst. My YouTube channel, ESPN Darryl Jacobs, College Basketball Analyst, Network Analyst. You can find me on Twitter, Darryl Jacobs 04. And you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Darryl Jacobs 0713. You can find me there as well. Instagram, of course, Darryl Jacobs, ESPN Networks College Basketball Analyst.
And mention the coaches, the Rising Coaches again.
Yes, you can find Rising Coaches, the largest coach association in America, at www.risingcoaches.com. And if you want to tap into what I do at the DEI Alliance, after you get to the .com, put a slash there, put DEI-Alliance.
Darryl, I want to thank you for coming on the show today. You truly have inspired us, encouraged us, given us a great outlook on what you do, and then have encouraged many others to be able to do the same thing. And as I say to all of my guests, you have gone beyond the culture, and I thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. As another host of two podcasts myself, you're actually the hero. I'm just providing the information, but your platform is the information that people need, and having people on like myself and other great guests that you have on is more important than having me on. You're the hero here. So thank you for doing what you do as well.
All right, Darryl, take care.
All right. Thank you.
Now, if you want to continue to hear inspiring interviews like the one you heard today, I want you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite streaming platform. Also, rate the show and please leave a comment. I would also love it if you would share this podcast with your friends to let them know that we're on. Finally, you can email me at beyondtheculturepodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. This is your host, Dr. David M. Walker, and we'll talk again on Beyond the Culture. Take care.